few days before Christmas, the English musician Chris Rea passed away. And almost instantly, a lifetime was distilled into a single line, one song. My social media feeds filled up within hours. The same headline kept appearing again and again, barely changing its shape. Driving home for Christmas singer dies at age 74. As if that was what remained. As if a career that spanned decades, a vast catalog of songs, a world built on its own terms, could be reduced to a seasonal ritual, returning every year as the days grow shorter and the mornings stay dark. Of course, Chris Rea will always be connected to that song, but seeing him framed so narrowly felt wrong. As if one familiar melody was enough to tell an entire life. And that is exactly why I wanted to make this video. Hello! And welcome to a brand new episode of We're Only in It for the Music, a YouTube series that takes you through the musical universe, from ABBA to Zappa and everything in between and beyond. Click the like and subscribe buttons, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss an episode. But enough of that, never mind the bollocks. We're only in it for the music. When I started thinking about making a video on Chris Rea, one thing quickly became clear. Chris Rea is not an artist you can capture in a single album, a single song, or a single ranking. The longer I thought about his work, the more obvious it became that none of those formats would truly do him justice. Not because they fall short, but because his music asks for more space than any single angle can offer. Chris Rea is not an artist defined by one definitive album or one all-encompassing hit. His body of work unfolds slowly, across decades, shaped by recurring themes, moods, and images that only reveal their full meaning when placed side by side. That is why I am not choosing a list or a standalone review here. Instead, this is a Chris Rea special, a story that moves chronologically through his life and his music to show how that body of work evolved, and why Chris Rea was so much more than a Christmas hit he is so often and so unfairly reduced to. Middlesbrough, in the northeast of England, is not a city known for music. It is an industrial town shaped by steel, shipbuilding, and labor. The city lies along the River Tees, fittingly nicknamed the Steel River. It is not a place that invites daydreaming, but an environment where hard work comes first and expectations are clearly defined. It was in this city that Chris Rea grew up. He came from a large family, the son of an Italian father and an Irish mother, surrounded by 6 brothers and sisters. His father ran several Italian ice cream cafes, lively places where the neighborhood gathered, where there was always movement. The family business was more than a source of income. It was a way of life, and its ambitions reached far. The cafes were meant to grow, to expand, to become something larger than Middlesbrough itself. From an early age, a future within that framework of hard work, discipline, and continuity seemed set out for Chris. He was born on March 4th, 1951, into a family where looking ahead mattered more than standing still. But in his early 20s, his attention began to shift. Through the radio, he heard music that seemed to have nothing to do with his immediate surroundings. Chris discovered the work of blues musician Charlie Patton and became fascinated by the sound of the bottleneck, the slide guitar. It was not polished music, but raw, abrasive, deeply human. A sound that stirred something inside him. Later, he would admit that his father's ice cream empire could have grown into a global chain. But while that future was taking shape outside, Chris was often found at the back of the cafe, in the storage room, away from the noise, a guitar resting on his lap, practicing until everything around him fell silent. Not to be seen, but because that sound carried him somewhere else. In the early 1970s, Chris Rea took his first serious steps into music. In 1973, he joined the local band Magdalene. The group had just undergone a striking change. Their singer, David Coverdale, had left to join Deep Purple. By then, Rea was already writing songs for the band, though he remained out of the spotlight. That changed unexpectedly during a live performance when the band's lead singer failed to show up. Rea stepped in and sang that night, suddenly finding himself at the front of the stage. Not out of ambition, but out of necessity, a pattern that would return more than once throughout his career. Not long after, he formed his own band, The Beautiful Losers, who went on to win Melody Maker's Best Newcomers Award. Rea's distinctive, gravelly voice stood out, and it was precisely that voice that caught the attention of Magnet Records. The label saw potential in him as a solo artist and released his first single, So Much Love, in 1974. Under contract with Magnet, Rea began work on his debut album, Whatever Happened to Benny Santini. The title referred to a stage name he had proposed after the label tried to give him a more commercially appealing image. Rea went along with the idea only partially, and would later admit that this was the first time he became aware of how sharply the interests of an artist and a record label could diverge. According to Magnet co-founder Michael Levy, the album's original recordings were even destroyed, deemed incapable of properly showcasing Rea's talent. The project was started from scratch. The result led to unexpected success. Fool, If You Think It's Over reached #1 in the United States, and Chris Rea was suddenly established as an artist. Remarkably, it was a song built around piano, not the slide guitar that would later become so central to his sound. Magnet preferred to position him as a piano-playing singer-songwriter, in the tradition of Elton John or Billy Joel. There was little room within the label for his subtle, blues-oriented guitar playing. Success in America gave Chris Rea visibility, but not artistic freedom. His relationship with Magnet Records remained strained. The early albums he released under contract often sound flat and muted, as if their sharper edges had been deliberately smoothed away. Rea would later admit that during this period, he believed producers and record executives knew better than he did. "I never thought for a minute that they might have another agenda," he said later. "All of a sudden, I was the goose that laid the golden egg. And it was hell for me." Producer Gus Dudgeon and the men in suits, as Rea called them, tried to soften his blues influences and make them more accessible. Looking back, Rea acknowledged that he too often went along with what others expected from him, instead of following his own instincts. The first 5 or 6 albums from this period are interesting as documents of an artist still in development. They always contain a handful of strong songs, sometimes even tracks that would later find success in re-recorded versions, but taken as a whole, they are not essential albums. The talent is clearly audible. The direction is not. Gradually, that began to change. On albums such as Water Sign and Wired to the Moon, his sound becomes clearer, the production warmer, the songs more personal. But the true turning point came in 1985 with Shamrock Diaries. Here, place, memory, and music finally converge. Songs like Steel River, Stainsby Girls, and Josephine feel not only timeless, but inevitable, as if Rea was at last saying what he had been carrying with him all along. By this time, his career as a live performer was also gaining momentum. He was playing larger venues and was able to pay off a £320,000 debt to Magnet Records, earning real money from his music for the first time. Yet once again, he chose not to take the most financially attractive route. He turned down an offer to tour America for 3 years. Chris Rea chose his wife and child over fame and status. It is a decision that says a great deal about who he was, and perhaps even more about why his music always retained its sense of humanity. Around this period, Rea finally found a form in which he could truly shine creatively. As a solid songwriter with a powerful, gravelly voice and an unmistakable slide guitar sound, it was the foundation on which he would continue to build his career, and on which later albums like On the Beach and Dancing with Strangers would stand. Records that gave him both artistic freedom and commercial stability. With the albums The Road to Hell and Auberge, Chris Rea reached a level of commercial success that surpassed anything he had experienced before. His move to East West Records turned him into a global star almost overnight. Album sales climbed into the millions, and tours sold out months in advance. Yet this success never felt like a victory to Rea. On the contrary, the bigger his name became, the stronger his desire grew to decide for himself what he would and would not take part in. Despite his enormous popularity in the United States, he refused to embark on extensive tours there. He also declined an invitation to appear on the immensely popular MTV Unplugged. These refusals were not artistic statements aimed at the outside world, but deeply personal choices. Rea had little interest in formats, expectations, or media circuses. Looking back, he would later admit that he may have dismissed certain opportunities too quickly, but at the time, His need for autonomy outweighed visibility or status. It is characteristic of an artist who, even at the height of his success, struggled with the idea that success itself comes with conditions. Where Eric Clapton brought his love of the blues to a global audience through Unplugged, Chris Rea could just as easily have done the same. But formats and celebrity never held much appeal for him. Although Chris Rea was known for his stubbornness, there were moments in his career when he reluctantly went along with what record executives expected of him. Not out of conviction, but to keep the peace. He would later admit that for too long, he assumed others knew better than he did. Yet even during his most successful years, Rea continued to search for greater depth. Albums such as God's Great Banana Skin and Espresso Logic reveal an artist unwilling to settle into repetition. God's Great Banana Skin opens with the simmering 9-minute-long Nothing to Fear, a clear statement from a musician who refused to reduce his work to radio-friendly formats. Even if the numerous single edits in radio cuts suggested otherwise, Espresso Logic includes a song dedicated to his second daughter, Julia, and signals how personal themes were increasingly finding their way into his music. That desire to bring music, story, and image together ultimately led to La Passion, a project in which Rea shaped both the soundtrack and the film itself. It was a deeply personal work, where his love of car racing, melancholy, and Italian culture converged. But here, too, a familiar pattern emerged. Interventions by men in suits altered the original screenplay so drastically that Rea eventually felt estranged from the project altogether. The result was another bitter disappointment, yet once again, the music endured. Despite global success, sold-out venues, and financial security, Rea consistently chose a life he could keep within his own grasp. He favored his family over long American tours and held on to a pace that suited him. It makes clear that success was never the end goal for Chris Rea. At most, it was a byproduct of something else entirely, making music on his own terms. After the cautious buildup at the beginning of his career and the major successes of the 1980s, Chris Rea's discography shows a slight dip in the late 1990s. Not so much in the quality of his songwriting, but in the way his music was shaped and presented. The Blue Cafe serves as a telling example. The title track contains everything one might expect from a Chris Rea song: atmospheric, restrained, and carried by his unmistakable voice. Over the course of a full album, however, the Blue Cafe becomes burdened by production choices that make the music feel less timeless. Electronic drum loops and digital textures give the record a smoother, at times more distant sound. Interestingly, the album was well received upon release. In hindsight, however, its sound feels more firmly anchored in its era than in Rea's own musical identity. That direction is pushed even further on The Road to Hell Part 2. The electronic approach takes center stage here and weighs heavily on the songs. While many of the compositions have undeniable potential, they never fully come into focus under the album's clinical production. Thematically, too, the record feels uneasy. Rea's half-spoken observations about computers and the internet come across as functional rather than deeply lived. The title suggests a continuation of The Road to Hell from 1989, but musically and emotionally, that connection is largely absent. It is precisely during this period that it becomes clear how sensitive Rea's music is to context. His greatest strengths lie in atmosphere, place, and human presence, elements that do not easily coexist with a rigid technological sound. When that balance tips too far, his music loses some of its natural weight. That this was not a definitive turn becomes clear with King of the Beach. Here, Rea sounds looser and warmer again. The summery, languid atmosphere aligns more naturally with his musical instincts, without feeling like a calculated attempt to reclaim commercial ground. The album suggests an artist aware of the sense of alienation that had crept into his work, and capable of adjusting course once more. At the very moment when everything seems to fall into place, artistically, commercially, and personally, the pace at which Chris Rea had lived for years comes to an abrupt halt. He becomes seriously ill, and suddenly, he is forced to stop, for months, away from studios, tours, and expectations. Later, he would say that it was only during this period of enforced stillness that he began to realize how far he had drifted from his original intentions. not because his career had failed, but because everything he had built along the way suddenly lost its meaning. Illness leaves no room for ambition, strategy, or image, only for questions. While Rea was recovering, the music industry carried on regardless. The men in suits saw opportunities: a high-profile duets album, collaborations designed to reintroduce his name to a younger audience. The same commercial reflexes that had already been applied to other established artists were now set in motion again. This time, however, Rea stepped away completely. He had made a promise to himself. If he recovered, he would return to where it had all begun for him. Not to success, but to music, to the blues. Not as a stylistic device, but as a foundation. Back to the roots. To protect that freedom, he founded his own label, Jazzy Blue. For the first time in his career, he worked entirely outside the influence of producers, men in suits, and marketing department. No formats, no expectations, no compromises. Just making music on his own terms. The consequences of that choice are clearly audible. Between King of the Beach and follow-up album Stony Road lies a distinct dividing line. Not only musically, but mentally as well. Where his earlier work often balanced autonomy against adaptation, from this moment on, Rea chose himself without hesitation. It is important not to romanticize this. Illness is neither a gift nor a necessary lesson. But in the case of Chris Rea, it did strip away everything that was non-essential. What remained was an artist with nothing left to prove, and therefore, finally, completely free. From that point onward, his body of work can be divided into two parts. A Chris Rea up to the year 2000, shaped by struggle, success, and compromise. And a Chris Rea from 2002 onward, returning to the core and staying there. With Stony Road, Chris Rea reveals himself as never before, unadorned, unfiltered, and entirely free from expectation. The polished productions and soft rock leanings of earlier years give way to space, breath, and slowness. Gospel and blues form the foundation of an album that is not concerned with style, but with survival. The influence of Mississippi Delta blues is clearly audible, yet Stony Road is no stylistic exercise. After his illness, Rea no longer sounds like an artist merely influenced by the blues, but like someone who has lived it. The songs breathe recovery, struggle, and cautiously regained hope. Nothing grand or heroic, just deeply human. That understanding comes into sharp focus on Easy Rider and the title track, The Blues as a Way to Survive. The slide guitar is neither virtuosic nor expansive, but functional and raw. It carries emotion without amplifying it. Pain is not displayed, but made palpable. Stony Road was released as a double album and was met with remarkably positive responses from both critics and audiences. Even so, the project did not come without resistance. In the documentary Dancing Down Stony Road, we see Rea's manager fighting to convince skeptical business interests, the men in suits, that a blues-filled double album did not have to be commercial suicide. Reference was made to the unexpected global success of Buena Vista Social Club, a record that proved sincere. Traditional Cuban music could still resonate with a worldwide audience. Chris Rea stood his ground, not out of stubbornness, but out of conviction. After his illness, there was no longer room for half measures. Stony Road therefore marks not only his physical recovery, but also a definitive creative reorientation. From that point onward, his albums cease to function as stepping stones within a career logic. Instead, they become self-contained projects. The blues remains the point of departure, sometimes explicit, sometimes as an undercurrent, but always as a moral and musical compass. That devotion culminates in Blue Guitars, an 11 CD box set in which Rea fully unfolds his love for the blues. From origin to variation, from tradition to personal interpretation. The project feels less like a career highlight than a legacy, a lifetime of listening, playing, and searching brought together in one monumental work. Whether Blue Guitars should be considered his finest album is ultimately a matter of perspective. But as a summary of who Chris Rea became after everything he endured, it is difficult to imagine a more convincing statement. Albums such as The Blue Jukebox, The Return of the Fabulous Hofner, Blue Notes, Santo Spirito Blues, and Road Songs for Lovers do not sound like attempts to remain relevant, but like the work of an artist fully at peace with his place. The music often moves slowly, unhurried, and uncompromising, as if time itself no longer plays a role. The longer you listen to Chris Rea's music, the more familiar themes begin to return. Not as repetition, but as echoes. As if he keeps answering his own songs, sometimes years apart. Only when his work is heard as a whole does it become clear that nothing ever truly disappears. It merely shifts in meaning. In the beginning, there is a fool who should not think that love is over. It's just begun. Just like the musical journey of Chris Rea, years later, that same fool reappears in I Ain't the Fool, no longer as a character, but as a boundary. Then the fool gains a shadow of a fool. And within that shadow, there is a soul, the soul of my father's shadow. Together, they become the shadows of the big man from the album The Blue Cafe. That shadow takes on color, and that color is blue. Blue becomes a defining state of mind in the musical life of Chris Rea. Inside the Blue Cafe stands a blue jukebox, playing both an up-tempo pop song and the ballad September Blue. Two distinct, unique tracks sharing the same title. The Blue Cafe sits at the intersection of Blue Street and Guitar Street. Walk that street far enough, and you reach the sea. There, Rea sings Screw You and Your Deep Blue Sea. He returns on the beach, and later, he becomes king of the beach. Two albums deliberately mirrored against each other. He does the same with two different songs, both titled All Summer Long. But once the summer fades, Rea is left looking for the summer. He sings about it on the album Auberge. In the title track, and later again in Set Me Free, he says farewell to that place. Then the journey continues, along the road to hell. Once again, in two parts. Even when he concludes I Can't Dance to That, a song in which he references the road to hell once more. He never truly stops moving. Via the last open road, he arrives at Stony Road. And there, he dances. Dancing my blues away. With the dancing girls. The Stainby girls. Dancing to Motown along the banks of Steel River. That river returns nearly 20 years later in his work as Steel River Blues. His hometown remains his anchor. It is where he builds a family. Children arrive. First, Josephine, a few years later, Julia. But in the cycle of life, birth and death walk hand in hand. Heaven is sung of, among others, and tell me, there's a heaven. Death comes to symbolize the winter of life, and yet, hope remains in winter song, and in both footsteps in the snow and footprints in the snow. Winter is also the season of the joy of Christmas. Chris is driving home for Christmas, in his beloved Daytona, perhaps with a soft top somewhere along the hard shoulder. In his car, Chris Rea feels like an easy rider, the same name he gave to the night nurse who administered his pain medication during his long illness. He came close to death, but he returned. Rea overcame his illness and lived for more than 20 years in borrowed time, years in which he enriched our world with music of rare beauty. Chris Rea once sang a tribute to his beloved racing driver, Ayrton Senna. The two-part suite of a song called Saudade opens with words that could just as easily apply to his own life. Nothing lasts forever, but some things end too soon. And that was my tribute to Chris Rea. I'm curious to know what you think of this unique artist. Let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading your thoughts. You can listen to all the music featured in this episode via the Spotify playlist. That's where all the musical connections and parallels come together. Make sure to follow the channel on Facebook and Instagram for updates, because I'll follow you if you follow me. All the links are right below this video. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new one. Tell a friend about the channel. That's always appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. And in the meantime, drop the needle, press play. And remember, we're only in it for the music.